When Instructor Varex raised the gravity to 8 times standard, he expected screams, fractures, and at least one emergency evacuation. That was usually how first contact training with mixed species recruits ended when discipline failed. What he did not expect was the human at the end of the line glancing around the chamber, adjusting his shoulders once, and asking in a calm voice that carried across the room, "Is this the warm-up? Or should I wait before taking the gear seriously?" That single sentence would force an entire academy to rewrite what it believed about Earth. Instructor Varex had built his reputation over 19 academy cycles and had no patience left for species that arrived with impressive files and collapsed the moment pressure became real. He stood near the center of Chamber 4, arms folded behind his back, his dark armored scales reflecting the pale white light from the gravity emitters embedded in the walls. At nearly 7.5 feet tall, with shoulders wide enough to block half the control console when he turned, he had become a problem recruits whispered about before arrival and remembered for years after graduation. His assistant, a narrow-framed Tellarian named Seth, remained beside the main control column, trying not to look nervous while reviewing biometric profiles. 15 recruits, Seth said quietly, reading from the pad. 3 low-pressure species, 4 standard gravity, 2 high-resistance arthropods, 1 aquatic adaptation transfer, and 1 human. Varex clicked his jaw ridges. 1 human, he repeated, as if the words themselves were mildly offensive. The chamber doors opened. The recruits entered in uncertain formation, some trying to appear disciplined, others already intimidated by the room itself. Chamber 4 had no decoration, no comfort, no visible mercy. Only reinforced black flooring, suspended weight rails, vertical climb columns, and the overhead emitters that could turn ordinary movement into suffering within seconds. Several recruits immediately noticed the warning symbols near the wall. One of the aquatic transfers stopped walking. "Why are the structural braces this thick?" she whispered. "Because," Varex said loudly enough for all of them to hear, "the chamber once cracked under load when someone overestimated their species." That ended the whispering. Then he noticed the human. The file had said, Elias Mercer, age 27, Earth military exchange candidate, no enhancement implants, no skeletal reinforcement, no chemical adaptation package. The human looked disappointingly ordinary. Medium height, lean frame, dark training uniform, short hair, neutral expression. No visible arrogance, no visible fear either. That usually meant hidden arrogance. Varex disliked hidden arrogance more than open arrogance. The recruits aligned along the floor markers. Mercer took the far right position, glanced once at the ceiling emitters, then at the reinforced rails, then forward again. Still calm. Varex began pacing. "You are here because someone decided you were worth military resources. That decision remains under review. Most of you will fail before your second rotation. Some of you will fail today. A few may survive long enough to become useful." He stopped directly in front of a trembling recruit from a low-gravity moon colony. "You are not special because your homeworld had storms." He moved to another. "You are not dangerous because your species evolved claws." Then he stopped in front of Mercer. "And you are not impressive because your planet likes dramatic weather reports." The human blinked once. "Yes, sir," Mercer said. No reaction, no ego. That irritated Varex more than if the human had smiled. He turned sharply. "Baseline movement test, no equipment. 50 floor presses, 50 vertical lifts, then full chamber perimeter sprint. 20 minutes. The recruits moved, some fast, some uncertain. Mercer dropped immediately into perfect floor press position. Varex nodded once towards Seth. The assistant understood and tapped the first increase. Gravity rose to 2 times standard. The reaction came instantly. Bodies hit the floor harder than expected. A 4-armed recruit let out a sound halfway between panic and mechanical failure. One crystalline cadet lost arm control after the 6th repetition. The aquatic transfer collapsed sideways and stared at the floor like it had personally betrayed her. Mercer continued. Down, up, no strain, no shaking, breathing even. At repetition 22, Varex narrowed his eyes. At 30, he looked at the panel. 2 standard, correct. At 40, Mercer's pace remained identical. At 50, he stood smoothly and rolled his shoulders. The others were still fighting gravity like drowning animals. Vertical lifts, Varex barked. The human obeyed instantly. Again, controlled movement. No hesitation, no visible effort spike. Raise to 4, Varex said quietly. Seth looked up. Sir? 4. The chamber deepened with a low mechanical hum. Gravity doubled again. This time the sound in the room changed. A recruit near the center dropped flat and did not immediately move. Another shouted something incoherent in panic. 2 species from low-pressure environments were now physically unable to complete standing transitions. Mercer stopped once, looked down, shifted his footing, then resumed, at exactly the same rhythm. Seth stared. That should not... I know what it should do, Varex said. Mercer finished vertical lifts first, then looked around. Sir, he said. Varex turned slowly. Yes? Should I start the sprint now, or wait until everyone catches up? Not sarcasm, not arrogance. A genuine question. One recruit nearby actually made an offended choking noise while pinned halfway to the floor. Varex stepped closer. You may begin. Mercer started running at 4 times standard gravity, not sprinting hard, not straining, just controlled motion. The reinforced floor echoed under each step, but his balance remained perfect. At the far wall, he turned cleanly, accelerated slightly, and came back. Seth checked biometrics twice. Heart rate elevated, yes, but nowhere near overload. No panic chemistry, no muscle failure indicators, nothing remotely normal. Raise to 6, Varex said. Sir, chamber safety, raise it. The emitters screamed softly. The room became heavy enough that even Varex himself felt pressure enter his knees. Now movement changed for everyone. Even standing became work. Several recruits were no longer participating, they were surviving. Mercer slowed near the center line, stopped, and looked up. Then he smiled faintly, not proud, almost thoughtful. This is closer, he said. And for the first time since the session began, Varex felt something unfamiliar. Not irritation, not discipline, something colder, confusion. Varex did not enjoy confusion. Confusion implied incomplete control, and incomplete control was how instructors lost authority in front of recruits who were already searching for weaknesses. He had built an entire career on never appearing surprised. Yet there he stood in a reinforced gravity chamber at 6 times standard, watching one human jog a perimeter loop with the expression of someone deciding whether the exercise was mildly useful or only slightly disappointing. The other recruits were in various advanced stages of collapse. One of the crystalline cadets had managed to crawl behind a support rail and was now clinging to it with all 4 upper limbs, while making tiny chiming noises that Seth's translator identified as theological distress. The aquatic transfer had flattened herself against the floor and announced very calmly that if anyone needed her, she would be dying with dignity. A broad-shelled arthropod from Keros had locked all 6 legs and was trembling so hard his equipment tags rattled like wind chimes. Mercer completed another lap. Not fast now. At 6 standard, fast would have been absurd, even for Varex. But the human's pace remained steady, deliberate, efficient. His posture was slightly lower, arms looser, foot placement more deliberate. Adjusted, yes. Struggling, no. Biometrics, Varex said. Seth swallowed and checked again. Respiration elevated but stable. Muscular stress higher than at 4, obviously, but still within what the human profile labels as controlled exertion. No ligament distress, no cardiac anomaly, no microfracture alarms. No one is stable at 6, Varex said. Mercer rounded the far marker and came back into view. Apparently one is, Seth replied before he could stop himself. Varex turned slowly. You are developing a dangerous habit of commentary. Yes, sir. Mercer crossed the center line and slowed to a stop directly in front of them. A thin sheen of sweat had appeared at his temples now, which was the first piece of evidence Varex had seen all morning that the human was made of material known to physics. "Sir," Mercer said, breathing slightly harder but still infuriatingly composed, "if this is a chamber calibration test, I think the left side is a little heavier than the right." Seth stared. Varex blinked once. "The left side is not heavier." Mercer looked over his shoulder, then back at the floor. "Huh, weird. Sure feels like it on the turn." Seth quietly checked the chamber map. The left arc was, in fact, 0.03 higher because one emitter had auto-compensated during the previous cycle. The assistant lowered the pad very slowly. Varex ignored him on principle. "You are telling me," the instructor said, each word clipped and precise, "that while under 6 times standard gravity, you can feel a minor imbalance during directional change." Mercer considered that. "I mean, when you put it that way, it sounds kind of dramatic." A recruit on the floor lifted his head with heroic effort. "Kind of dramatic?" Mercer glanced over. "Sorry, you okay?" "No, that makes sense." The arthropod cadet tried to laugh and nearly passed out. Varex's jaw ridges clicked once. The chamber was slipping, not physically, socially. Recruits were no longer focused on surviving him. They were focused on surviving near the human, which somehow felt worse. "Perimeter sprint," Varex barked to the room. "All of you, move!" A weak chorus of despair answered him. Mercer tilted his head. "Do you want me to pace them, sir?" "No." "Yes, sir." The human resumed running. One recruit attempted to stand, managed a quarter rise, and collapsed with the soft emotional sound of someone remembering every mistake that had led to military service. Another got 2 steps into a sprint and immediately discovered that under 6 standard gravity, the body had opinions about ambition. Mercer completed his 2nd full circuit, then his 3rd. Then, because the universe had apparently decided Varex required a personal lesson in humility, the human slowed beside the aquatic transfer, crouched under impossible load, and said, "Hey, try exhaling on the push phase. Don't fight all the weight at once. Think about stacking your frame under you." She stared at him from the floor. "I am a marine biologist." "Cool. Today you're also a pancake. Hands under shoulders." Varex almost stopped the exchange out of pure professional offense. Then he noticed something worse. She was listening. Using the human's instructions, the aquatic transfer managed to get 1 knee under herself, then 2. Then, shaking violently, she rose halfway. Seth looked at Varex with naked alarm. "Sir, he is coaching them. I can see that. And it is working. And I can also see that." Mercer moved on to the crystalline cadet next. "Don't lock the top joints," he said. "You're bracing like you're trying to become a statue. Use the lower limbs to absorb the load." "My lower limbs are considering resignation." "Fair, but ask for 30 more seconds before they quit." It should not have helped. It did. The cadet managed 3 ugly but real steps. Varex felt a muscle jump near his eye. At that exact moment, the chamber doors opened, and Lieutenant Hesh entered with 2 ranged technicians and the expression of someone prepared to witness disciplinary excellence. Hesh was broad-shouldered, silver-eyed, and deeply insufferable when another instructor's class went badly. "I heard Chamber 4 was making history," Hesh announced. Then he saw the control display, then the recruits pinned to the floor, then Mercer jogging past a support beam at 6 times standard gravity. Hesh stopped speaking. Mercer completed another lap, saw the newcomers, and gave a polite nod while still moving. "Morning!" Hesh turned to Varex. "Why is there a human exercising inside an industrial accident?" "That," Varex said, "is what I am attempting to determine." Mercer came in on another turn and slowed again, this time finally breathing hard enough to satisfy the basic emotional needs of the observing staff. "Sir," he called, "I don't want to tell you how to run your chamber, but if this is still the beginner block, you may want to warn the others before the real warm-up starts." Silence hit the room like a secondary pressure wave. One recruit actually whispered, "Still." Hesh stared at the human, then at the display, then back at Varex. What exactly did he just say? Varex did not answer immediately because he was busy realizing two things at once. First, Mercer had not been mocking him. Second, the human seemed sincerely convinced that 6 times standard gravity was preparatory exercise. That meant one of two possibilities. Either Elias Mercer was the most physically distorted anomaly ever admitted into the Academy, or every record the Galactic Exchange Corps had on human baseline tolerance was catastrophically, professionally, civilization-level wrong. Varex looked at Seth. "Raise it." The assistant went pale. "Sir, 8 times standard exceeds trainee safety by a factor that I did not ask for a lecture. I asked for gravity. Sir, the other recruits, emergency braces, wall supports, medical drones on standby, then raise it." The chamber alarms changed tone. Red strips ignited along the floor rails. Support anchors emerged from the walls. A medical drone descended from the ceiling with the cold efficiency of a machine that expected broken bones and wanted a clear path to them. Every recruit who still had enough strength to lift their head looked toward the control column in horror. Mercer looked toward it with interest. The human actually rolled his neck once and bounced on the balls of his feet. "Okay," he said quietly, almost to himself. "Now we're talking." Seth's hand hovered over the final command. Varex kept his eyes on Mercer. 8 times standard, he said, and the chamber dropped into hell. The transition to 8 times standard gravity did not feel like an increase. It felt like the room itself had decided to become hostile. Even Varex, standing beside the control column, where stabilizers compensated part of the load, felt his spine compress under the sudden pressure. His knees bent involuntarily, claws scraping the floor as his own body adjusted. Lieutenant Hesh swore under his breath and immediately reached for the support rail behind him. Across the chamber, every non-human recruit still standing collapsed in different ways. One folded instantly, another dropped to both knees with a cry that became a cough. The crystalline cadet hit the floor flat and stayed there, eyes open, blinking in slow disbelief. The aquatic transfer simply whispered, "No," as if denial could alter physics. A medical drone pivoted toward the center, scanning for fractures. And Mercer planted his feet wider, lowered his center of balance, exhaled once through his nose, then straightened again. Not fully comfortably, not casually, but unmistakably upright. The silence that followed was so complete that even the emitters humming overhead sounded louder than before. The human rolled one shoulder, then the other. A tiny adjustment, a measured test of muscle against load. His expression changed for the first time all morning. Not strain exactly, but attention. The kind of face someone made when finally recognizing that an exercise might deserve respect. "Oh," Mercer said, breathing a little deeper now. "Yeah, that's heavier." Seth looked as if he had just witnessed mathematics apologize. Hesh stepped closer to the display, one hand gripping the rail so tightly the metal groaned. "He's still standing." "Yes," Varex said. "At 8. I am aware." Mercer took one step forward. The sound of his boot striking reinforced flooring echoed harder than before, because under that pressure, every impact carried violence. Then a second step, controlled, slow. He tested another. No collapse, no stumble, just deliberate movement under a force that should have pinned him like the others. The nearest recruit, still flat against the ground, turned his head enough to watch and whispered, "That cannot be biologically responsible." Mercer looked down at him while continuing to move. "Don't lock your jaw," he said. "Makes the pressure feel worse. You are walking." "Yeah, at 8. Also, yeah." The recruit shut his eyes as though conversation itself had become emotionally expensive. Varex crossed half the chamber, each step now heavy even for him, and stopped 3 meters from Mercer. "Recruit Mercer." "Yes, sir." "How much effort are you currently using?" The human thought about it. That alone offended several laws of dignity. Then he answered honestly, "Enough that I wouldn't want to sprint yet, sir." "Yet." The word landed badly. Hesh made a sound that was almost a laugh and almost panic. Varex stared. "You are telling me 8 times standard gravity does not prevent sprinting, only delays preference?" Mercer shrugged very slightly, which under 8 times gravity looked like a machine testing structural integrity. Depends how long the sprint is. No one spoke. The chamber lights reflected off sweat, now visible along Mercer's neck and forehead. His breathing had deepened, yes. His forearms showed tension. His calves were engaged like loaded cables, but he remained stable, alive, functional, thinking clearly enough to answer questions politely. Seth checked biometrics again, hands trembling. Heart rate significantly elevated now, muscular load extreme, bone stress rising but still below fracture threshold, ligament integrity intact. Sir, he should not be coherent. Mercer heard that. I'm right here. You should not be coherent, Seth repeated, before fear stopped him. The human gave a tiny grin. Honestly, this one finally feels like work. A recruit near the wall groaned. Finally. Mercer looked around the chamber, noticed that 3 cadets were still trying and failing to rise, and then did something Varex would later describe in official reports as the exact moment discipline surrendered to absurdity. The human crouched, not fully, only halfway, but under 8 times standard gravity, even lowering the body deliberately required force that should have made joints scream. He crouched beside the crystalline cadet. "Hey, listen to me," Mercer said. "Don't try to push straight up. Rotate first. Side load is easier." The cadet stared at him as if receiving tactical advice from a mythological disaster. "I cannot rotate." "You can. Use your lower limb first." "I am made of regret." "That's fine. Move the regret first." Hesh actually laughed this time, a short, shocked sound. The cadet obeyed. Very slowly, painfully, using Mercer's positioning guidance, he managed to shift one leg beneath himself, then another, still not standing, but no longer flat. The medical drone recalculated fracture probability and backed away in apparent confusion. Varex felt his own breathing deepen, not from gravity now, but from the realization that the human was still spending energy helping others while under chamber load that most instructors treated as emergency threshold. "Mercer," Varex said sharply. The human looked up. "Yes, sir. Front line marker." "Now." Mercer rose again and returned, movement slower than before, but still astonishingly controlled. By the time he reached the center stripe, sweat had darkened his collar. Good. At last, something honest. "Run," Varex said. Seth turned instantly. "Sir, run 1 perimeter." At 8 standard gravity, the chamber perimeter was 120 meters. Under those conditions, even 3 meters should have been enough to expose every lie a body could tell itself. Mercer inhaled, looked once toward the far wall, then nodded. "Yes, sir." He started moving. The first 3 steps were deliberate, heavy, each impact sending deep metallic echoes through the reinforced floor. Then his rhythm changed, not fast, not remotely fast by human standards perhaps, but undeniably a run, a real run. Arms controlled, torso forward, breathing timed, step after step under impossible pressure. The recruits watched like believers witnessing a forbidden miracle. At the far wall, Mercer touched the turn-rail with one hand, pivoted carefully, and came back. Halfway through the return, real strain finally appeared. Jaw tightened, breathing harder, shoulders working visibly now. But he did not stop. He crossed the center line and completed the perimeter, then bent slightly, hands on thighs, breathing hard for the first time all day. The chamber remained silent, except for his breathing. Varex realized everyone, including him, had been waiting for collapse. It never came. Mercer straightened again after 5 breaths. "Okay," he said between breaths. "That one counts as actual warm-up." Hesh stared openly now. "That was your warm-up." Mercer nodded. "Yeah. Back home, we usually start feeling honest after the lungs complain," Seth whispered, almost reverently. "What kind of world creates lungs like that?" No one answered immediately, because for the first time everyone in the chamber had begun to suspect the answer was much worse than any file had admitted. Varex had spent most of his professional life believing that every species eventually revealed its limits the same way, first through posture, then through breathing, then through fear. Muscles lied, pride lied, official records lied constantly, but the body, under enough pressure, always confessed. The problem standing in front of him was that the human body had confessed, and apparently the confession was more. Mercer remained near the center line, breathing hard, but recovering faster than the numbers on Seth's pad claimed he should. At 8 times standard gravity, even Varex could feel fatigue settling into his own shoulders now. His tail muscles were tightening. His knees had developed a dull internal burn that he deeply resented, because instructors were not supposed to feel humbled inside their own chamber. Lieutenant Hesh finally released the support rail and stepped closer. "Ask him," Hesh said quietly. "I was already going to. Ask him now before my brain decides this is a hallucination." Varex ignored the tone. "Recruit Mercer." "Yes, sir." "What gravity did you train under before arriving here?" Mercer wiped sweat from his forehead with the back of one hand, looked genuinely puzzled by the question, then answered as if discussing weather. "Earth normal, sir." "That means nothing here." "Oh, right." Mercer straightened slightly. "About 9.8 meters per second squared." Seth instantly began conversion calculations. Hesh leaned over his shoulder. The assistant entered the number once, then again, then a third time because disbelief apparently required ritual. His face changed. "Sir?" Varex did not look away from Mercer. "Say it. Equivalent baseline is approximately 1.73 standard galactic gravity." That landed harder than the chamber pressure. Even Hesh stopped moving. 1.73. Earth was not moderate. Earth was not slightly heavy. Earth sat far above half the Academy's classified heavy world thresholds. And Mercer had not arrived as some genetically engineered elite monster. He had arrived average. Varex slowly looked back at the human. "So when we began at standard gravity," Mercer nodded. "Honestly felt weird, sir. Weird. Too light." Hesh made a low sound that might have been pain. Mercer continued because he had clearly not yet realized he was destroying careers. At 2, it felt closer. 4 started feeling useful. 6 felt good. 8, he considered. 8 finally feels like I should respect my knees. A recruit pinned near the wall muttered, "Respect his knees." Another whispered, "We are studying a natural disaster." Seth kept staring at the conversion display as though numbers had betrayed him personally. "That means," the assistant said slowly, "that 8 standard gravity equals over 4.5 times his native baseline." Mercer looked toward him. "Wait, really? You did not know?" The human shrugged. "I knew it was heavy. Didn't know the exact ratio." Varex took a long breath. That ratio changed everything. It meant Mercer was functioning under pressure that should have shattered most species beyond recovery, while still speaking clearly, analyzing chamber balance, coaching recruits, and asking operational questions. It also meant the Academy's species classification files were dangerously incomplete. "Why are your records marked moderate adaptation?" Hesh asked. Mercer frowned. "No idea, sir. Maybe old survey data? Earth uses metric. Sometimes galactic files convert weird." Convert weird," Hesh repeated with visible disbelief. Seth whispered, "That phrase should not apply to military biology." The chamber still held at 8 standard gravity. Around them, recruits remained scattered across the floor, but something had changed. Several were watching Mercer less with despair now, and more with a kind of exhausted fascination. The crystalline cadet, still halfway upright thanks to earlier coaching, raised one trembling limb. "Human." Mercer turned. "Yes? How are your bones not powder?" Mercer gave him a tired smile. "They complain a lot, actually. You just don't hear it because they're internal." A weak laugh spread through the chamber. At 8 standard gravity, even laughter sounded expensive. Varex should have shut it down immediately. Instead, against instinct, he asked another question. "What was your training before military service?" Mercer looked surprised again, then answered, "School sports mostly. Running, wrestling. A little climbing, standard stuff, under 1.73 baseline. Yeah. How old were you?" "When I started wrestling. 10, maybe." Hesh closed his eyes briefly. Seth stopped pretending he understood the universe. One of your children, Hesh said slowly, trained impact sports under conditions that would hospitalize half our officer corps. Mercer tilted his head. When you say it like that, it sounds intense. It is intense. We mostly thought it was character building. The aquatic transfer near the floor said, "Your species builds character by surviving collapse." Mercer nodded politely. That sounds about right. A warning tone pulsed from the wall. Seth checked the chamber status. "Structural stress rising in lower emitters, sir. We should reduce load within 3 minutes or risk coil overheating." For the first time all session, Varex hesitated before giving an order. He looked at Mercer, at the recruits, at the chamber that had become less a training room and more a scientific confession. Then he said, "Maintain for 2 more minutes." Seth blinked. "Sir, I want one final test." Mercer heard that and immediately stood straighter despite visible fatigue. That tiny reaction did something strange to Varex's mood. The human was tired now, yes, but not intimidated, not even annoyed. If anything, Mercer looked interested. "Front rail," Varex ordered. Mercer moved toward the vertical weighted rail mounted near the center wall. At 8 standard gravity, even the empty rail platform weighed enough that most recruits avoided touching it unless commanded. A standard tactical crate sat locked beside it. 40 kilograms baseline mass. At 8 times gravity, effectively over 300 kilograms in chamber load. Hesh noticed where Varex was looking. "You cannot be serious." "I am." He just ran a perimeter. He also asked if this was warm-up. Mercer reached the crate and looked at it, then at Varex. "Lift?" "Yes." The human bent slowly, tested hand placement, adjusted stance twice, then exhaled. This time there was no illusion of ease. His forearms tightened instantly, back muscles locked. The first pull barely moved the crate. Mercer reset, lower again, exhaled harder, pulled. The crate rose an inch, then 3, then cleared the floor. A collective sound spread across the chamber, part disbelief, part exhausted outrage. Mercer held it only briefly before setting it down carefully. Not dropped, controlled. Then he stepped back, breathing heavily now, chest rising sharply. "Okay," he said between breaths. "That one's rude." Even Varex laughed, a short, involuntary sound that startled everyone, including himself. The recruit stared because apparently hearing Varex laugh was nearly as shocking as the lift itself. Seth immediately lowered gravity to 4 before the chamber coils protested harder. The relief hit the room like mercy. Bodies lifted from the floor. Several recruits inhaled like drowning survivors reaching air. Mercer straightened slowly, rolled one shoulder, and looked almost offended by how light 4 suddenly felt. "Wow," he said. "Now 4 feels tiny." The crystalline cadet whispered, "I hate your species." Mercer smiled. "Fair." Varex stood in silence for several seconds, watching him recover. Then he understood something uncomfortable. The morning had stopped being about breaking recruits. The morning had become about recalculating everything he knew about what counted as baseline strength. And the worst part was that Mercer still seemed convinced he was merely doing average work. By the time gravity settled fully at 4 standard, the chamber no longer sounded like a training facility. It sounded like survivors rediscovering oxygen. The aquatic transfer remained seated on the floor, arms draped over bent knees, staring at Mercer with the expression of someone reconsidering whether evolution had made an administrative error. The crystalline cadet was still upright now, barely, but upright enough to look offended by that fact. 2 of the low-gravity recruits had migrated to the nearest wall and were leaning against it like philosophical victims. Mercer, meanwhile, looked as if he had just completed a demanding but respectable workout. Sweat-darkened uniform, breathing still elevated, shoulders loose again, no tremor in the hands, no collapse, no medical intervention. The drone hovering overhead, apparently insulted at being unnecessary, slowly retreated toward the ceiling track. Varex stepped toward the center line. "Recruits, listen carefully." The room obeyed instantly, partly because discipline remained alive, and partly because no one currently possessed enough energy to disobey. What occurred here does not change training expectations. It changes your understanding of adaptation. Mercer glanced sideways, perhaps realizing for the first time that his existence had become instructional material. Varex continued. Some of you evolved under low atmospheric pressure, some under unstable magnetics, some under deep water compression. Each of you arrived believing your home conditions had prepared you adequately. He stopped beside Mercer. One of you arrived from a planet that apparently treats structural burden as culture. A weak laugh moved through the room. Mercer raised one hand slightly. To be fair, sir, most humans complain constantly. Your complaints are clearly decorative. That earned an actual laugh, even from Hesh. The lieutenant had recovered enough composure to circle slowly around Mercer, studying him like an officer inspecting a newly discovered military asset. How old are you? Hesh asked. 27, sir. Have you received elite military conditioning? Mercer shook his head. Basic infantry, reserve deployment rotation, then exchange candidate prep. Reserve, Hesh repeated, as in not full-time frontline specialist. The lieutenant looked at Varex. This is reserve. I heard him. This species stores reserve soldiers capable of standing under 8 standard gravity. Mercer politely cleared his throat. Standing, yes. Running there is definitely unpleasant. The aquatic transfer lifted a hand weakly. He says, unpleasant like the rest of us, we're not flattening into geological layers. Mercer gave her an apologetic nod. Sorry, different baseline. That phrase has become emotionally offensive, the crystalline cadet said. Seth, still reviewing chamber logs, suddenly froze. Sir, Varex turned. What now? I compared Mercer's movement metrics at 8 standard with archived instructor data. And, the assistant swallowed, at equivalent load, his stride efficiency is higher than 70% of Academy combat instructors. Hesh stared openly. Varex held out a hand. Show me. Seth passed the pad. The graph was undeniable. Mercer's gait under crushing load remained mechanically efficient, beyond what most trained staff achieved under half that ratio. Even fatigue recovery curves were abnormal. The human's heart rate had already begun dropping faster than predicted. Mercer, Varex said. Yes, sir? How often did you run under load before military service? The human thought for a moment. Depends. School years, maybe 3 or 4 times a week if wrestling season was active. Later, more often. With weight? A B, sometimes weighted vest, sometimes hills. Hills? Yeah, stairs too. The aquatic transfer closed her eyes. Their children do terrain voluntarily. Mercer looked confused again. You don't? No. Hesh leaned closer. What exactly counts as difficult training on Earth? Mercer answered immediately, unaware that every sentence now caused visible stress in nearby listeners. Depends who you ask. Some people do mountain endurance, long-distance military marches, sand work, cold weather drills. Marines do some ugly stuff. Special forces get worse. Worse, Hesh repeated faintly. Mercer nodded. Much worse. The room collectively disliked that information. Varex handed the pad back to Seth. New exercise. Several recruits made sounds of protest so immediate that even Varex nearly admired the honesty. He ignored them. Not for collapse, for observation. Mercer looked attentive again. Assist. The human blinked. Assist, sir? You spent half the session coaching recruits without authorization. You may now do it with authorization. That produced visible surprise, then immediate enthusiasm. Yes, sir. Varex pointed toward the center markers. Show them how you adjusted posture under 6 and 8. Mercer looked at the others as if unsure whether they truly wanted that. The crystalline cadet answered first. If your method prevents death, speak. Mercer stepped into the center and lowered his stance. Okay. Main mistake everyone makes under sudden load is fighting from the top first. You tense shoulders, neck, upper frame. That burns energy fast. He demonstrated, shifting weight deliberately. You want load traveling through your frame, not stopping in one joint. The aquatic transfer slowly copied him. Badly. Mercer adjusted her elbow. No, lower. Think stacked support, not reaching. The arthropod recruit tried next and nearly tipped sideways. Mercer caught one of his upper limbs before he hit the floor. Wider base. Your species actually has an advantage here. I do not feel advantaged. You will. The surprising part was not that Mercer understood his own body. It was that he understood theirs quickly. Different limbs, different centers of balance, different joint priorities. Yet within minutes he was adjusting each recruit instinctively. Seth whispered, "He teaches, like he has done this before." Mercer overheard. "Back home I coached wrestling drills for teenagers one summer." Hesh nearly choked. Teenagers. Yeah, mostly posture correction and conditioning. Varex looked at Mercer differently now, not as an anomaly, but as a species sample carrying invisible habits the Academy had never accounted for. The human demonstrated breathing under load next. Short, controlled exhale. No panic, no upper chest waste. The recruits copied, poorly at first, then less poorly. At 4 standard gravity, with Mercer pacing them, several recruits achieved cleaner movement in 10 minutes than they had in the previous hour under direct instructor command. That irritated Varex only briefly before professional honesty defeated pride. The human was effective, dangerously effective, and still completely unaware of how absurd he looked in the Academy's framework. Then Mercer glanced toward the chamber ceiling. "Sir? Yes? Or what's the chamber ceiling for instructor certification?" Varex narrowed his eyes. "Why?" "Just curious. That answer guarantees I will not tell you immediately." Mercer smiled faintly. "Fair." Hesh answered anyway. 10 standard for instructor peak certification." Mercer's eyebrows lifted. "Seriously?" "Yes." "That sounds amazing." The room went silent again, because no one in Chamber 4 had expected genuine excitement at the phrase 10 standard gravity. The aquatic transfer whispered, "He wants more." The crystalline cadet replied, "We should hide the controls." Varex folded his arms. "You are not touching 10. Mercer raised both hands politely. "Didn't ask, sir." "You were about to." "I was thinking about asking." "Denied." "Understood." But the look on the human's face said he had already added the number to some private list of future goals. And for reasons Varex did not fully enjoy, that made him suspect the morning was still not finished, surprising him. The next surprise arrived from outside the chamber. The main doors opened without warning, and Commander Terrell entered with 2 Academy observers and the kind of expression senior officers wore when rumors had reached them faster than official reports. He was older than most field instructors, broad through the chest, silver markings across his neck scales indicating command lineage, and he did not enjoy wasting time on exaggerated stories, which meant he already expected exaggeration. That expectation lasted exactly 3 seconds. He took in the room, recruits drenched in fatigue, support rails deployed, emergency drone hovering, Lieutenant Hesh present when he had no scheduled business there. And in the center, a human casually demonstrating weighted breathing posture, while talking an aquatic transfer through foot alignment under 4 standard gravity. Tyrell stopped, then slowly looked at Varex. "I was told," the commander said, "that you attempted to break a human by turning Chamber 4 into a mining collapse." Varex answered without flinching. "I attempted standard adaptive pressure escalation. At 8 standard, it became educational." Tyrell's eyes moved to the display panel. The chamber logs were still visible. 2, 4, 6, 8. The commander's secondary eyelid flicked once, a rare sign of genuine surprise. "You took a first cycle recruit to 8. "Yes, sir." "And the human remains ambulatory." Mercer, hearing the conversation, turned and offered a respectful nod. "Sir." Tyrell looked directly at him. "You are recruit Mercer." "Yes, sir." "You remain standing at 8 standard gravity." Mercer considered that wording carefully. "For most of it, sir." The commander stared another second longer. Then, to Varex's growing satisfaction, he asked the same question every other authority figure eventually asked when faced with impossible evidence. "What exactly is Earth?" Mercer smiled the way someone smiled when answering a question they had heard many times, but never quite the same way. "Depends where you land, sir." That answer somehow made the room worse. Tyrell walked slowly toward the center markers. Explain. Mercer wiped remaining sweat from his forehead. Well, gravity's heavy, weather's unpredictable, terrain changes constantly, and most humans grow up adapting to whatever region they're in. Mountains, humidity, deserts, ice, cities, altitude, storms, depends. Your records classify Earth as moderate death world. Mercer gave a small shrug. Honestly, humans argue with our own records too, Hesh muttered. At least that part sounds sane. Tyrell turned to Seth. Show me the conversion. The assistant handed over the pad. The commander read the number. 1.73 standard baseline. Then read Mercer's chamber performance curve. Then the crate lift under 8 standard. Then the recovery rate. His expression changed very slightly. Not alarm, not disbelief. Strategic recalculation. How many humans are physically comparable to you? Tyrell asked. Mercer hesitated. That hesitation mattered more than any previous answer. Depends what comparable means, sir. Your current conditioning. Average military, plenty. Above you? Mercer nodded immediately. Oh, definitely. Silence returned. Even the recruits felt that answer land. The aquatic transfer slowly raised her head. There are stronger ones? Mercer looked apologetic. A lot stronger, yeah. The crystalline cadet whispered, this species should have paperwork attached to every individual. Tyrell kept his gaze locked on Mercer. And elite units? Mercer scratched the back of his neck. They'd probably be annoyed at this chamber limit. Hesh laughed once, but there was no humor left in it. Varex watched the commander process that statement exactly as he himself had processed earlier facts. First resistance, then unwilling acceptance. Tyrell handed the pad back. Varex. Yes, sir. From this moment forward, Chamber 4's gravity protocols involving human recruits require command-level notice. Yes, sir. And Earth's classification file is being escalated today. Mercer blinked. Did I break something administratively? No, Tyrell said. You broke confidence in several departments. That finally made Mercer laugh. A short, tired laugh. Genuine and unguarded. The sound unexpectedly changed the room again. The recruits were no longer looking at him like a threat. Now they looked at him like a bizarre resource the galaxy had forgotten to document correctly. Tyrell turned toward the remaining recruits. You all witnessed something valuable today. Not superiority, context. Several exhausted faces tried to appear attentive. The commander continued. Every species mistakes familiarity for normal. You believed your conditions defined difficulty. They define only your starting point. He looked briefly toward Mercer. Some species begin farther uphill. The aquatic transfer raised one hand weakly. Respectfully, sir, he begins on another mountain. That earned laughter, even from Varex. Real laughter this time, tired and uneven, but alive. Tyrell allowed it. Then he looked back at Mercer. Recruit. Yes, sir. You offered earlier to assist instruction. Mercer glanced at Varex before answering. Yes, sir. You still willing? Absolutely. Good. Beginning tomorrow, first cycle high-load adaptation will include human posture methods under supervision. Mercer looked genuinely pleased. That's awesome. The crystalline cadet muttered, he says awesome while we recover from structural despair. Mercer crouched beside him again. You stood longer than before. That matters. I stood because your species appears unwilling to obey natural law. Use whatever helps. The cadet actually smiled despite himself. Varex folded his arms and studied the room. 2 hours earlier, he had expected another ordinary intake session. Frightened recruits, predictable collapse, familiar authority. Instead, he now had a human casually rewriting academy assumptions while asking technical questions about chamber limits. And worse, he respected it. He respected the discipline more than the strength. Mercer had never bragged, never postured, never tried to dominate the room. He had simply treated impossible load as work and then helped others survive it. That unsettled Varex more deeply than raw power would have, because raw power could be managed. Calm power usually meant experience, and experience meant Earth had produced this before. Likely many times. "Recruits," Varric said finally. Every head lifted. "Session complete. Recovery protocol, hydration first. Medical scans mandatory for anyone who heard their skeleton complain." Several recruits began moving slowly toward the exit. Mercer stayed where he was. "Sir?" Varric looked at him. "Yes?" The human nodded toward the control column. "When I'm cleared, can I try 10 someday?" Hesh laughed immediately. Seth covered his face. The aquatic transfer whispered, "He asked anyway." Tyrrell looked at Varric, curious now. The instructor held Mercer's gaze for a long second, then answered in the only honest way available. "If you survive making me regret today, Les, we will discuss it," Mercer grinned. "Yes, sir." And as the chamber lights dimmed and exhausted recruits filed out beside a human who still looked ready for another round, Varric made a private decision he would never say aloud. For the first time in 19 academy cycles, he was looking forward to tomorrow.